Hey, welcome back to the Toy Box. It's another beautiful day. Today is Brew Day. What's Brew Day, you may ask? Well, we're gonna make some beer. That's right, beer. We're making beer at the Toy Box. How is that, toys? Wait till you see all the equipment we have. We'll be very clear, it's all a bunch of toys. We're making a Rye IPA today. We got a box of ingredients. I'm here with Chris, my brewing buddy. We're gonna make beer. Let's check out what we got. What do we have here, Chris?
Got some flaked rye here. It looks kind of like oatmeal. 2 pounds of that. And then we got 10 pounds of pale malt, and then a ½ pound of Victory in this bag here. As far as hops go, we got some Columbus hops, Simcoe hops, and some Cascade.
First things first, we have to sanitize. We use a little bit of Star San. And we mix this in with hot water, and we'll start cleaning our stuff. All right, first step, we're getting stuff cleaned up. And now we're getting ready to put some water on to start heating up for the first stage of the brew process. We have the Mega Pot. Right?
And it has a false bottom
And pull
in
it out.
that the grain sits on top of and allows the liquid to drain out in keeping the grain in the mash tun.
Okay, there we go.
That's what the false bottom looks like out.
Cool. So the next step in the brewing process here, we've heated our water up to roughly 165 degrees. And now the next thing we have to do in our mad scientist lab is connect up the hoses, which we have done. We have hot water will come out of this. We'll go through the pump and into the mash tun. And it'll fill the mash tun from the bottom up, and then we will add the grain. How many pounds of grain was this?
This is, in this bag, it's 10.5 pounds of grain. And then when we add the rye, that'll make, it's 2 more pounds. So 12.5 pounds total.
12.5 pounds of grain total. So now we have the mash, and the grain is going to steep for about an hour. And this extracts the sugar from the barley and the rye. And the temperature here on the thermometer, we keep an eye on here over the course of the next hour. It should stay pretty stable. Our process has been working really well for us. And we're at about 148 degrees or so, just slightly lower than where we normally like to be, but it should be just fine. We're still in the right temperature range here. So now we're refilling the water kettle here. And we're going to use this hot water to sparge the grain. And that's to rinse the last of the sugars out of it after it's done with the mash, because we want to make sure we get all of those fermentable sugars into the wort before we boil it. So our yeast selection for this Rye IPA is a Y yeast 1968 London ESB ale yeast in a smack pack. And if you're curious, there are 100 billion yeast cells in the palm of my hand. Chris is going to smack it, and we're going to let him start warming up. There's a little food pouch.
There we have it.
There you go.
Now I think we got it.
Very
So the yeast nutrients are now released into the liquid, and it will cause the yeast to start to activate as they warm up. And by the time we're ready to use this pack should be puffed up.
So as we prep each of these pots and kettles, we put the star san in here and we clean it good, because there is nothing more than there's nothing more important than sanitization when you're brewing beer. You want to have the right bugs in the beer. The wrong bugs, it's very bad. And here we're putting the sparge arm into our brew kettle. All right, Chris, so what do we have going on here now?
So now we're going to recirculate the mash for the last 15 minutes just to set the grain bed so it'll be ready for our sparging.
All right. And as this sparges, the pump will pump water from here through these tubes into the sparge arm, and this sparge arm will let the water out into the top of the grain, and it pumps it out from the bottom. And as this goes through, it will rinse the sugars out of this to try and get as much of the fermentable sugars out of the grain as possible here. But it also sets the grain bed into the false bottom and helps then clarify. So the grain gets set into the false bottom, and that acts as a filter so that we don't pull as much of the solids out of the grain when we then take the wort and put it into the boil kettle. So we're going to apply the power here. The pump is running. There it goes. And now here, we just let this run for a while to seat the grain bed. And then we'll pump this out into the boil kettle as we bring water in the next step. So this has been recirculating now for about 10 minutes. Look at that beautiful color in there. It smells so good. If you like beer, people that brew beer love the smell of the barley and the hops as you're making beer. So good. Now to measure the hops. It's wonderful. Bit of Cascade hops there. Take a nice sniff. Smell that? Oh yeah.
Putting in a 1/4 ounce of Simcoe here. And the same amount for Columbus.
All right, now we're going to redo our setup. It's going to get a little bit crazy here. We're going to have both pumps running. We've got 2 of these, a bunch of hoses. It's going to get pretty crazy. gonna take 2 hands, so we'll check back in as soon as we're done. Back in the mad scientist lab, we have this crazy contraption. So what is going to happen here is we are going to open this valve and we are going to run water through one pump, through the other hose, up and into the top of the kettle. And we are going to be rinsing the grain with clean water. At the same time, we're going to open this valve and the wort will come down through that pump and around all the way up and into this kettle over here through the valve on the side. And it will come in through that arm and fill up the boil kettle, and then we will be able to start the boil process. So here we have our water at about 170 degrees, and we're going to open this valve to let the water out there, and it's going to flow down to the pump. The rate of the water into this kettle will be controlled by this valve, and we'll adjust that for how fast we want it to flow in. So we are ready. We're going to plug in the first pump. There it goes. And we now have the clean water, or clean. Okay, now you call it clear water.
Clear water.
Fresh water, whatever. We now have the new fresh hot water at 170 degrees coming into the top of our mash tun. And we're going to run water in until there's about 1 inch on top, and then we'll start up the second pump to run into here. So we're going to open this valve to allow the water into here.
You don't want it to open
But we don't want it all the way. So we'll open this valve a little bit.
I think we're ready for here.
Okay, should I go ahead and start the pump?
Yep.
Pump number 2. Up. We'll add the hops. Get that valve adjusted to bring it in slow. We have both pumps running. Bringing water in from here into the top of here. And here we have, in case you're wondering, the traditional Brew Day snack. Summer sausage, pepperoni, cheese, and Triscuits. As the process continues, we can see the water starting to clear up here as we're rinsing the grain. And it won't be long as the water in this kettle begins to run out. We eventually will shut off the pump that's feeding into here, and we'll drain the remainder of that all the way into that other kettle and then start the boil. So all of the wort has transferred over into the boil kettle. Our pre-boil volume is about 6.5 gallons. Here, I don't know if this will show up in the video. On the scale here, we're right at 6.5 gallons. And we are going to take this kettle. We're going to disconnect it from our life support system here. And we're going to get it onto the stove and start putting some heat in it.
Alright, so now that all our wort is transferred over into the boil kettle, we're going to take our pre-boil gravity to see how much sugar we extracted from the grains. And this is called a refractometer, and this will tell us how much sugar is in the liquid.
Take a
couple of drops here. Cover this thing up. Hold it up to the light. And take our measurement.
All of the wort is drained out of the mash tun. We have nothing but the spent grain left. So we're going to go take and dump this out back and get rid of it. We'll let the birds and the deer eat it. So here's our boil kettle. Here is the wort beginning to heat up. It's going to take a while. We're going to bring this to a boil, but we'll have to let this boil for an hour or so. So by the time we're ready for the next step, we're really going to be a couple hours later down the road today. And there we are. It made it, the magical 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And we have a nice rolling boil. So this is going to boil for an hour, and as it boils we're going to slowly lose some volume here, and we should end up down I think right around 6 gallons or so after the boil. And after fermentation and all of that, we'll probably finally be closer to 5 when all is said and done. We have a little bit of hops that is going to go in about 15 minutes. And then after that, the last hop addition will be right towards the end. So we're going to check in on this in about 15 minutes when we add the hops. So we've had about 15 minutes later, and we got some more hops. And we're going to let this keep boiling for another 45 minutes or so. We'll check back in on it with more hops and some more fun stuff. A little bit of Irish moss. This is supposed to help with the clarity of the beer. So while we wait for the boil to finish, we're going to sit out here and drink one of our previous brews. This one is a pale ale made with local malt from right near here in Marysville, Ohio. It won't be long. We're going to do an all local brew, probably with local honey, local malt, maybe some local hops if we can find it. But in the meantime, I'm going to sit here and enjoy a nice cold home brew while we wait for the boil to finish. And we'll go back and start the next step. So what do we have up next?
So next, with 10 minutes to go in the boil, we're going to add the Irish moss, which is going to help have a clear beer a little later on to help everything drop out of suspension in the liquid. And then after the boil is done, we're going to shut it off for like 5 minutes. Then we're going to get the whirlpool going and add our whirlpool addition for like 20 minutes. We'll shut the whirlpool off and then add our last addition hops and let that rest for about 20 minutes, and then we'll transfer it into the fermenter and pitch the yeast.
So we've reached the end of the boil. We have turned off the heat, and at this point it's just resting. We're going to let this rest for about 5 minutes, and while we do that, we're going to get our hoses hooked back up on these two quick connect fittings. We're going to hook up this pump, and we're going to use that to recirculate the wort. And the way this was set up, if you'll remember, the one fitting down in here blows sideways, and this is going to create a whirlpool in here, and that is going to cause all of the solids from the hops and the Irish moss to sort of move into the center of the whirlpool, so we can, as we then drain this out, we don't catch all of those into the fermentation chamber, the primary fermentation chamber. We are going to be adding more hops as well in this at the very end here. So let's get started. So we're going to get started on hooking up the hoses, and we'll be right back. There we go. It's running. And it's whirlpooling. And we're going to let this run here for a little while. How long does this whirlpool for?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, so this can whirlpool for 20 minutes.
So we'll put some hops in here shortly. We should do that now.
Big old thing of hops. There we go. Whoosh. All right, a little more sanitizing we got to do, this time on the fermentation chamber. We have this toy here. This is a carboy washer. We're going to fill this with a different kind of sanitizer. This one's called SaniClean. We mix it up the same way we do with the Star San. We use this one in this particular contraption because the Star San suds up too much when the pump is running on this. And the SaniClean works a lot better for that while the pump is running. So we're going to get some SaniClean set up and some hot water in here. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and fill this guy up and get the carboy on here and start washing. We've got our washer, we've got our carboy. We're going to flip this upside down on here and we're going to start washing. There we go. Whoosh. And this runs sanitizer through the jug. We do this for probably 10 or 15 minutes because we want to make sure the inside of this jug is really good and clean. Up to this point, all of the sanitization has been done prior to boiling the beer. But the next few steps, especially including the fermentation where it sits for a period of weeks in these fermentation chambers at room temperature where we're purposely letting the yeast do its thing, we have to make sure it's really good and clean. Whirlpool's been running for a while now, so we're about ready to shut this off. So now the pump is shut off. We have one last hop addition that Chris is going to put in here. There we go, another big batch of hops. Ooh, those are going to be delicious.
Now we're going to let this sit for another 20 minutes. Then we'll cool it off, and then we'll put it in, transfer into the fermenter.
Cool. And what's this last batch of hops for in this particular edition?
Aroma and flavor.
Aroma and flavor. So this is going to give us our good IPA aroma and flavor from these hops. They're going to be delicious. So this next gadget that we have here is a wort chiller. It's really pretty simple. It's just a piece of copper pipe, copper tubing. It's all twisted up. So we're going to dip this in the sanitizer. We're going to let this sanitize in here. And the next step, when the wort is ready, after it's had time for the hops to sit for a little while, we are going to hook up a hose from the kitchen sink to the wort chiller. And it's going to run water through the wort chiller that is submerged in the kettle. And then it will drain down the drain. And as this goes, the pump will circulate the whirlpool again and stir it for us. And that should help bring down the temperature of this to where we can transfer it into the primary fermentation vessel that we are sanitizing in the little fountain and pitch the yeast. And the yeast is still over here getting itself ready. We have happy yeast. Remember when Chris smacked this earlier to get the smack pack going, it was all nice and flat, but as the yeast has warmed up and started going after the nutrients that were in that pack that he popped. It has puffed up nicely here. So we have lots of happy yeast in this bag that are just waiting to make us some delicious beer. Yeah. So Chris just took the reading with the refractometer, and I've updated our brew log. This is our old school paper log. We use a field notes book for it. I love it. So this Rye IPA here, we're right in at 15 bricks, 1.060 on our gravity. So I think we're right where we want to be. This is going to come in, I'm guessing, maybe just a little less than 5.5% alcohol when all's said and done. We'll have to see where we are on our final gravity, of course, to calculate that. But based on previous batches we've done, we're probably going to be somewhere 5.3 to 5.5%, I think, on this Rye IPA. Okay, so we are all hooked up. We're going to turn on the water. We've got the water running here.
I'm going to turn on
through the wort chiller, back down into the sink. We got hot water coming out as it's pulling heat out of the wort. The pump is running, and we've got it circulating and stirring this for us. And I got just a little bit of a leak here. I got to tighten that guy down. We are currently at about 164 degrees right now, and we need to bring this all the way down to about 69 before we transfer to the primary fermenter and pitch the yeast. So we'll keep track of temperature as we go, and we'll check back in a little bit. So the wort chiller's been running for a little while here. The circulation pump is stirring it for us. We're down to about 100 degrees. Still got a little ways to go to get to 69 before we'll be able to transfer to the fermentation chamber and pitch the yeast. But we're well on our way here. So we'll check back in here in a little bit, and we'll show you that transfer process and bust open that yeast pouch and pitch the yeast and get it ready to start fermenting. All right, we're at 74. Getting close. We need to get down to about 68 or 70, so should be just a few more minutes. Well, everything is cooled down, so now we are draining the wort out of the kettle and into the primary fermentation chamber. And this is where the beer will spend the next week. And then we will transfer it to the secondary fermentation chamber, where it will spend another 2 weeks. So we have a nice puffed up yeast pack here, ready to go. Chris is going to cut it open, and we are going to pitch the yeast. Yummy yeast. 100 billion yeast cells. We counted every one of them.
Yes, we did.
So there we go. We are ready to put the lid on the fermentation chamber. We're going to get the airlock on it, and we're going to set it up downstairs where it'll stay nice and cool, and it'll be revisited in a week. Put in the stopper.
So now we're filling the airlock with some water, and this will show us that it's bubbling and it's actually doing something in there. Because as it ferments, the yeast gives off alcohol and CO2, so the CO2 will bubble up through that airlock.
And last but not least, we want to keep light off of it, so we are going to cover it with a blanket. Airlock poking out the top. And there we go. We can check in on that tomorrow and see the yeast bubbling away. Make sure it's all working. It's been about 48 hours or so here since we transferred the beer into the fermentation chamber and brought it down and got it all tucked in. And we can see the yeast are happily fermenting away, producing plenty of CO2 here, bubbling out of the airlock. So I think we're in really good shape with this batch. This coming weekend we're going to transfer it to the secondary fermenter, and I'll make sure we make a video on that as well. I'll show you how that works, and a couple weeks later then we'll bottle it, and that's the rest of the process. So it's still got a few weeks here before it's good and ready. Probably another 5 weeks or so before the bottles are conditioned and ready to go. We'll certainly make one last video when we crack open the bottles and enjoy the first taste. So, hope to see you back, and don't forget to subscribe.